Welcome to Mythology at Dusk. Take a slow breath. Whatever the day has held, however heavy it has been, let it settle now. Tonight, we visit ancient Greece and Rome. Tonight, a story that has been told for 3,000 years. The story of how the Greeks explained the world. A world where the sun rode a chariot across the sky, where the wind had brothers with names, and where every olive grove and quiet spring had a spirit that watched over it. We'll begin at the beginning, in the deep silence before anything at all, and travel forward, unhurried, through the birth of Cronus and the Titans, the war on Olympus, the long reign of Zeus, and the tangled human stories of the heroes he watched over, Perseus and the Gorgon, Heracles and his labors, Jason and the Golden Fleece. Read tonight, gently, from a quiet compilation written more than a century ago. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now. Every comment helps this small channel reach someone else who needs quiet tonight. And if Mythology at Dusk has helped you sleep, consider subscribing so tomorrow night's story is ready when you are. Now close your eyes. Take a slow breath. Let the old stories carry you. Let us begin. Introduction. Before entering upon the many strange beliefs of the ancient Greeks and the extraordinary number of gods they worshipped, we must first consider what kind of beings these divinities were. In appearance, the gods were supposed to resemble mortals, whom, however, they far surpassed in beauty, grandeur, and strength. They were also more commanding in stature, height being considered by the Greeks an attribute of beauty in man or woman. They resembled human beings in their feelings and habits, intermarrying and having children, and requiring daily nourishment to recruit their strength, and refreshing sleep to restore their energies. Their blood, a bright ethereal fluid called ichor, never engendered disease, and, when shed, had the power of producing new life. The Greeks believed that the mental qualifications of their gods were of a much higher order than those of men, but nevertheless, as we shall see, they were not considered to be exempt from human passions, and we frequently behold them actuated by revenge, deceit, and jealousy. They, however, always punish the evildoer and visit with dire calamities any impious mortal who dares to neglect their worship or despise their rites. We often hear of them visiting mankind and partaking of their hospitality, and not unfrequently, both gods and goddesses, Aetas, become attached to mortals, with whom they unite themselves, the offspring of these unions being called heroes or demigods, who were usually renowned for their great strength and courage. But although there were so many points of resemblance between gods and men, there remained the one great characteristic distinction, viz., that the gods enjoyed immortality. Still, they were not invulnerable, and we often hear of them being wounded and suffering in consequence such exquisite torture that they have earnestly prayed to be deprived of their privilege of immortality. The gods knew no limitation of time or space, being able to transport themselves to incredible distances with the speed of thought. They possessed the power of rendering themselves invisible at will, and could assume the forms of men or animals as it suited their convenience. They could also transform human beings into trees, stones, animals, etc., either as a punishment for their misdeeds or as a means of protecting the individual, thus transformed, from impending danger. Their robes were like those worn by mortals, but were perfect in form and much finer in texture. Their weapons also resembled those used by mankind. We hear of spears, shields, helmets, bows and arrows, etc., being employed by the gods. Each deity possessed a beautiful chariot, which, drawn by horses or other animals of celestial breed, conveyed them rapidly over land and sea according to their pleasure. Most of these divinities lived on the summit of Mount Olympus, each possessing his or her individual habitation, and all meeting together on festive occasions in the council chamber of the gods, where their banquets were enlivened by the sweet strains of Apollo's lyre, whilst the beautiful voices of the muses poured forth their rich melodies to his harmonious accompaniment. Magnificent temples were erected to their honor, where they were worshipped with the greatest solemnity. Rich gifts were presented to them, and animals, and indeed sometimes human beings, were sacrificed on their altars. In the study of Grecian mythology, we meet with some 9 curious, and what may at first sight appear unaccountable notions. Thus we hear of terrible giants hurling rocks, upheaving mountains, and raising earthquakes which engulf whole armies. These ideas, however, may be accounted for by the awful convulsions of nature, which were in operation in prehistoric times. Again, the daily recurring phenomena, which to us, who know them to be the result of certain well-ascertained laws of nature, are so familiar as to excite no remark, were, to the early Greeks, matter of grave speculation, and not unfrequently of alarm. For instance, when they heard the awful roar of thunder and saw vivid flashes of lightning, accompanied by black clouds and torrents of rain, they believed that the great God of heaven was angry, and they trembled at his wrath. If the calm and tranquil sea became suddenly agitated, and the crested billows rose mountains high, dashing furiously against the rocks, and threatening destruction to all within their reach, the sea god was supposed to be in a furious rage. When they beheld the sky glowing with the hues of coming day, they thought that the goddess of the dawn, with rosy fingers, was drawing aside the dark veil of night to allow her brother, the sun god, to enter upon his brilliant career. Thus personifying all the powers of nature, this very imaginative and highly poetical nation beheld a divinity in every tree that grew, in every stream that flowed, in the bright beams of the glorious sun, and the clear, cold rays of the silvery moon. For them, the whole universe lived and breathed, peopled by 1,000 forms of grace and beauty. The most important of these divinities may have been something more than the mere creations of an active and poetical imagination. They were possibly human beings who had so distinguished themselves in life by their preeminence over their fellow mortals that after death they were deified by the people among whom they lived, and the poets touched with their magic wand the details of lives, which, in more prosaic times, would simply have been recorded as illustrious. 10. It is highly probable that the reputed actions of these deified beings were commemorated by bards, who, traveling from one state to another, celebrated their praise in song. It therefore becomes exceedingly difficult, nay, almost impossible, to separate bare facts from the exaggerations which never fail to accompany oral traditions. In order to exemplify this, let us suppose that Orpheus, the son of Apollo, so renowned for his extraordinary musical powers, had existed at the present day. We should no doubt have ranked him among the greatest of our musicians, and honored him as such. But the Greeks, with their vivid imagination and poetic license, exaggerated his remarkable gifts and attributed to his music supernatural influence over animate and inanimate nature. Thus we hear of wild beasts tamed, of mighty rivers arrested in their course, and of mountains being moved by the sweet tones of his voice. The theory here advanced may possibly prove useful in the future in suggesting to the reader the probable basis of many of the extraordinary accounts we meet with in the study of classical mythology. And now, a few words will be necessary concerning the religious beliefs of the Romans. When the Greeks first settled in Italy, they found in the country they colonized a mythology belonging to the Celtic inhabitants, which, according to the Greek custom of paying reverence to all gods, known or unknown, they readily adopted, selecting and appropriating those divinities which had the greatest affinity to their own, and thus they formed a religious belief which naturally bore the impress of its ancient Greek source. As the primitive Celts, however, were a less civilized people than the Greeks, their mythology was of a more barbarous character, and this circumstance, combined with the fact that the Romans were not gifted with the vivid imagination of their Greek neighbors, leaves its mark on the Roman mythology, which is far less fertile in fanciful conceits and deficient in all those fairy-like stories and wonderfully poetic ideas which so strongly characterize that of the Greeks. 11. Origin of the world, First Dynasty. Uranus and Gaia, Coelus and Terra. The ancient Greeks had several different theories with regard to the origin of the world, but the generally accepted notion was that before this world came into existence, there was in its place a confused mass of shapeless elements called chaos. These elements becoming at length consolidated by what means does not appear, resolved themselves into two widely different substances, the lighter portion of which, soaring on high, formed the sky or firmament, and constituted itself into a vast, overarching vault, which protected the firm and solid mass beneath. Thus came into being the two first great primeval deities of the Greeks, Uranus and or Gaia. Uranus, the more refined deity, represented the light and air of heaven, possessing the distinguishing qualities of light, heat, purity, and omnipresence, whilst Gaia, the firm, flat, life-sustaining earth, was worshipped as the great all-nourishing mother. Her many titles refer to her more or less in this character, and she appears to have been universally revered among the Greeks, there being scarcely a city in Greece which did not contain a temple erected in her honor. Indeed, Gaia was held in such veneration that her name was always invoked whenever the gods took a solemn oath, made an emphatic declaration, or implored assistance. Uranus, the heaven, was believed to have united himself in marriage with Gaia, the earth, and a moment's reflection will show what a truly poetical and also what a logical idea this was. For, taken in a figurative sense, 12ers, this union actually does exist. The smiles of heaven produce the flowers of earth, whereas his long-continued frowns exercise so depressing an influence upon his loving partner that she no longer decks herself in bright and festive robes, but responds with ready sympathy to his melancholy mood. The firstborn child of Uranus and Gaia was Oceanus, the ocean stream, that vast expanse of ever-flowing water which encircled the earth. Here we meet with another logical, though fanciful conclusion, which a very slight knowledge of the workings of nature proves to have been just and true. The ocean is formed from the rains which descend from heaven and the streams which flow from earth. By making Oceanus therefore the offspring of Uranus and Gaia, the ancients, if we take this notion in its literal sense, merely assert that the ocean is produced by the combined influence of heaven and earth, whilst at the same time their fervid and poetical imagination led them to see in this, as in all manifestations of the powers of nature, an actual, tangible divinity. But Uranus, the heaven, the embodiment of light, heat, and the breath of life, produced offspring who were of a much less material nature than his son Oceanus. These other children of his were supposed to occupy the intermediate space which divided him from Gaia. Nearest to Uranus, and just beneath him, came Ether, a bright creation representing that highly rarefied atmosphere which immortals alone could breathe. Then followed air, which was in close proximity to Gaia and represented, as its name implies, the grosser atmosphere surrounding the earth which mortals could freely breathe, and without which they would perish. Ether and air were separated from each other by divinities called Nephilae. These were their restless and wandering sisters, who existed in the form of clouds, ever 13, floating between ether and air. Gaia also produced the mountains, and Pontus, the sea. She united herself with the latter, and their offspring were the sea deities Nereus, Themis, Phorcys, Ceto, and Eurybia. Coexistent with Uranus and Gaia were two mighty powers who were also the offspring of chaos. These were Erebus, darkness, and Nyx, night, who formed a striking contrast to the cheerful light of heaven and the bright smiles of earth. Erebus reigned in that mysterious world below where no ray of sunshine, no gleam of daylight, nor vestige of health-giving terrestrial life ever appeared. Nyx, the sister of Erebus, represented night and was worshipped by the ancients with the greatest solemnity. Uranus was also supposed to have been united to Nyx, but only in his capacity as god of light, he being considered the source and fountain of all light, and their children were Eos, Aurora, the dawn, and Hemera, the daylight. Nyx again, on her side, was also doubly united, having been married at some indefinite period to Erebus. In addition to those children of heaven and earth already enumerated, Uranus and Gaia produced two distinctly different races of beings called giants and titans. The giants personified brute strength alone, but the titans united to their great physical power, intellectual qualifications variously developed. There were three giants, Briareus, Cottus, and Gyges, who each possessed 100 hands and 50 heads, and were known collectively by the name of the Hecaton Keres, which signified 100-handed. These mighty giants could shake the universe and produce earthquakes. It is therefore evident that they represented those active subterranean forces to which allusion has been made in the opening chapter. The Titans were 12 in number. Their names were Oceanus, Ceos, Krios, Hyperion, Iapetus, Cronus, Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys. Now Uranus, the chaste light of heaven, the essence of all that is bright and pleasing, held in abhorrence his 14 crude, rough, and turbulent offspring, the giants, and moreover, feared that their great power might eventually prove hurtful to himself. He therefore hurled them into Tartarus, that portion of the lower world which served as the subterranean dungeon of the gods. In order to avenge the oppression of her children, the giants, Gaia instigated a conspiracy on the part of the Titans against Uranus, which was carried to a successful issue by her son Cronus. He wounded his father, and from the blood of the wound which fell upon the earth sprang a race of monstrous beings, also called giants. Assisted by his brother Titans, Cronus succeeded in dethroning his father, who, enraged at his defeat, cursed his rebellious son, and foretold to him a similar fate. Cronus now became invested with supreme power and assigned to his brothers offices of distinction, subordinate only to himself. Subsequently, however, when, secure of his position, he no longer needed their assistance, he basely repaid their former services with treachery, made war upon his brothers and faithful allies, and, assisted by the giants, completely defeated them, sending such as resisted his all-conquering arm down into the lowest depths of Tartarus. Second Dynasty. Cronus, Saturn. Cronus was the god of time in its sense of eternal duration. He married Rhea, daughter of Uranus and Gaia, a very important divinity, to whom a special chapter will be devoted hereafter. Their children were 3 sons, Hades, Pluto, Poseidon, Neptune, Zeus, Jupiter, and 3 daughters, Hestia, Vesta, Demeter, Ceres, and Hera, Juno. Cronus, having an uneasy conscience, was afraid that his children might one day rise up against his authority, and thus verify the prediction of his father of 15 Uranus. In order, therefore, to render the prophecy impossible of fulfillment, Cronus swallowed each child as soon as it was born, greatly to the sorrow and indignation of his wife Rhea. When it came to Zeus, the 6th and last, Rhea resolved to try and save this one child at least, to love and cherish, and appealed to her parents, Uranus and Gaia, for counsel and assistance. By their advice, she wrapped a stone in baby clothes, and Cronus, in eager haste, swallowed it, without noticing the deception. The child thus saved, eventually, as we shall see, dethroned his father Cronus, became supreme god in his stead, and was universally venerated as the great national god of the Greeks. Illustration. Anxious to preserve the secret of his existence from Cronus, Rhea sent the infant Zeus secretly to Crete, where he was nourished, protected, and educated. A sacred goat, called Amalthea, supplied the place of his mother by providing him with milk. Nymphs, called Melissae, fed him with honey, and eagles and doves brought him nectar and ambrosia. He was kept concealed in a cave in the heart of Mount Ida, and the curettes, or priests of Rhea, by beating their shields together, kept up a constant noise at the entrance, which drowned the cries of the child and frightened away all intruders. Under the watchful care of the nymphs, the infant Zeus throve rapidly, developing great physical powers, combined with Fuchs 16, extraordinary wisdom and intelligence. Grown to manhood, he determined to compel his father to restore his brothers and sisters to the light of day, and is said to have been assisted in this difficult task by the goddess Metis, who artfully persuaded Cronus to drink a potion, which caused him to give back the children he had swallowed. The stone which had counterfeited Zeus was placed at Delphi, where it was long exhibited as a sacred relic. Cronus was so enraged at being circumvented that war between the father and son became inevitable. The rival forces ranged themselves on 2 separate high mountains in Thessaly. Zeus, with his brothers and sisters, took his stand on Mount Olympus, where he was joined by Oceanus and others of the Titans, who had forsaken Cronus on account of his oppressions. Cronus and his brother Titans took possession of Mount Othrys and prepared for battle. The struggle was long and fierce, and at length Zeus, finding that he was no nearer victory than before, bethought himself of the existence of the imprisoned giants, and knowing that they would be able to render him most powerful assistance, he hastened to liberate them. He also called to his aid the Cyclops, sons of Poseidon and Amphitrite, who had only one eye each in the middle of their foreheads, and were called Brontes, thunder, Sterops, lightning, and Pyrachmon, fire anvil. They promptly responded to his summons for help, and brought with them tremendous thunderbolts which the Hecaton Kyres, with their 100 hands, hurled down upon the enemy, at the same time raising mighty earthquakes, which swallowed up and destroyed all who opposed them. Aided by these new and powerful allies, Zeus now made a furious onslaught on his enemies, and so tremendous was the encounter that all nature is said to have throbbed in accord with this mighty effort of the celestial deities. The sea rose mountains high, and its angry billows 17 hissed and foamed. The earth shook to its foundations, the heavens sent forth rolling thunder, and flash after flash of death-bringing lightning, whilst a blinding mist enveloped Cronus and his allies. And now the fortunes of war began to turn, and victory smiled on Zeus. Cronus and his army were completely overthrown, his brothers dispatched to the gloomy depths of the lower world, and Cronus himself was banished from his kingdom and deprived forever of the supreme power, which now became vested in his son Zeus. This war was called the Titanomachia, and is most graphically described by the old classic poets. Illustration. With the defeat of Cronus and his banishment from his dominions, his career as a ruling Greek divinity entirely ceases. But being, like all the gods, immortal, he was supposed to be still in existence, though possessing no longer either influence or authority, his place being filled to a certain extent by his descendant and successor, Zeus. Cronus is often represented as an old man leaning on a scythe, with an hourglass in his hand. The hourglass symbolizes the fast fleeting moments as they succeed each other unceasingly. The scythe is emblematical of time, which mows down all before it. Saturn. The Romans, according to their custom of identifying their deities with those of the Greek gods whose attributes were similar to their own, declared Cronus to be identical with their old agricultural divinity Saturn. They believed that after his defeat in the 18 Titanomachia and his banishment from his dominions by Zeus, he took refuge with Janus, king of Italy, who received the exiled deity with great kindness and even shared his throne with him. Their united reign became so thoroughly peaceful and happy, and was distinguished by such uninterrupted prosperity, that it was called the Golden Age. Saturn is usually represented bearing a sickle in the one hand and a wheat sheaf in the other. A temple was erected to him at the foot of the Capitoline Hill, in which were deposited the public treasury and the laws of the state. Rhaetia, OPS. Rhea, the wife of Cronus, and mother of Zeus and the other great gods of Olympus, personified the earth and was regarded as the great mother and unceasing producer of all plant life. She was also believed to exercise unbounded sway over the animal creation, more especially over the lion, the noble king of beasts. Rhea is generally represented wearing a crown of turrets or towers and seated on a throne, with lions crouching at her feet. She is sometimes depicted sitting in a chariot, drawn by lions. The principal seat of her worship, which was always of a very riotous character, was at Crete. At her festivals, which took place at night, the wildest music of flutes, cymbals, and drums resounded, whilst joyful shouts and cries, accompanied by dancing and loud stamping of feet, filled the air. This divinity was introduced into Crete by its first colonists from Phrygia, in Asia Minor, in which country she was worshipped under the name of Cybele. The people of Crete adored her as the Great Mother, more especially in her signification as the sustainer of the vegetable world. Seeing, however, that year by year, as winter appears, all her glory vanishes, her flowers fade, and her trees become leafless. They poetically express this process of nature under the figure of a lost love. She, 19, was said to have been tenderly attached to a youth of remarkable beauty named Attis, who, to her grief and indignation, proved faithless to her. He was about to unite himself to a nymph called Sagaris when, in the midst of the wedding feast, the rage of the incensed goddess suddenly burst forth upon all present. A panic seized the assembled guests, and Attis, becoming afflicted with temporary madness, fled to the mountains and destroyed himself. Cybele, moved with sorrow and regret, instituted a yearly mourning for his loss, when her priests, the Corybantes, with their usual noisy accompaniments, marched into the mountains to seek the lost youth. Having discovered him, they gave full vent to their ecstatic delight by indulging in the most violent gesticulations, dancing, shouting, and, at the same time, wounding and gashing themselves in a frightful manner. OPS. In Rome, the Greek Rhea was identified with Ops, the goddess of plenty, the wife of Saturn, who had a variety of appellations. She was called Magna Mater, Mater Diorum, Berecynthia Idea, and also Dindymene. This latter title she acquired from 3 high mountains in Phrygia, whence she was brought to Rome as Cybele during the Second Punic War, BC 205, in obedience to an injunction contained in the Sibylline books. She was represented as a matron crowned with towers, seated in a chariot drawn by lions. Division of the world. We will now return to Zeus and his brothers, who, having gained a complete victory over their enemies, began to consider how the world, which they had 20 conquered, should be divided between them. At last it was settled by lot that Zeus should reign supreme in heaven, whilst Hades governed the lower world, and Poseidon had full command over the sea. But the supremacy of Zeus was recognized in all 3 kingdoms, in heaven, on earth, in which of course the sea was included, and under the earth. Zeus held his court on the top of Mount Olympus, whose summit was beyond the clouds. The dominions of Hades were the gloomy unknown regions below the earth, and Poseidon reigned over the sea. It will be seen that the realm of each of these gods was enveloped in mystery. Olympus was shrouded in mists, Hades was wrapped in gloomy darkness, and the sea was, and indeed still is, a source of wonder and deep interest. Hence we see that what to other nations were merely strange phenomena served this poetical and imaginative people as a foundation upon which to build the wonderful stories of their mythology. The division of the world being now satisfactorily arranged, it would seem that all things ought to have gone on smoothly, but such was not the case. Trouble arose in an unlooked-for quarter. The giants, those hideous monsters, some with legs formed of serpents, who had sprung from the earth and the blood of Uranus, declared war against the triumphant deities of Olympus, and a struggle ensued, which, in consequence of Gaia having made these children of hers invincible as long as they kept their feet on the ground, was wearisome and protracted. Their mother's precaution, however, was rendered unavailing by pieces of rock being hurled upon them, which threw them down, and their feet being no longer placed firmly on their Mother Earth, they were overcome, and this tedious war, which was called the Gigantomachia, at last came to an end. Among the most daring of these earthborn giants were Enceladus, Rhoetus, and the valiant Mimas, who, with youthful fire and energy, hurled against heaven great masses of rock and burning oak trees, and defied the lightnings of Zeus. One of the most powerful monsters who opposed Zeus in this 21 war was called Typhon, or Typhoeus. He was the youngest son of Tartarus and Gaia, and had 100 heads, with eyes which struck terror to the beholders, and awe-inspiring voices frightful to hear. This dreadful monster resolved to conquer both gods and men, but his plans were at length defeated by Zeus, who, after a violent encounter, succeeded in destroying him with a thunderbolt, but not before he had so terrified the gods that they had fled for refuge to Egypt, where they metamorphosed themselves into different animals and thus escaped. Theories as to the origin of man. Just as there were several theories concerning the origin of the world, so there were various accounts of the creation of man. The first natural belief of the Greek people was that man had sprung from the earth. They saw the tender plants and flowers force their way through the ground in the early spring of the year after the frost of winter had disappeared, and so they naturally concluded that man must also have issued from the earth in a similar manner. Like the wild plants and flowers, he was supposed to have had no cultivation, and resembled in his habits the untamed beasts of the field, having no habitation except that which nature had provided in the holes of the rocks, and in the dense forests whose overarching boughs protected him from the inclemency of the weather. In the course of time, these primitive human beings became tamed and civilized by the gods and heroes, who taught them to work in metals, to build houses, and other useful arts of civilization. But the human race became in the course of time so degenerate that the gods resolved to destroy all mankind by means of a flood. Deucalion, 22, son of Prometheus, and his wife Pyrrha, being, on account of their piety, the only mortals saved. By the command of his father, Deucalion built a ship, in which he and his wife took refuge during the deluge, which lasted for 9 days. When the waters abated, the ship rested on Mount Othrys in Thessaly, or according to some on Mount Parnassus. Deucalion and his wife now consulted the oracle of Themis as to how the human race might be restored. The answer was that they were to cover their heads and throw the bones of their mother behind them. For some time they were perplexed as to the meaning of the oracular command, but at length both agreed that by the bones of their mother were meant the stones of the earth. They accordingly took up stones from the mountainside and cast them over their shoulders. From those thrown by Deucalion there sprang up men, and from those thrown by Pyrrha, women. After the lapse of time, the theory of autochthony from autos, self, and chthon, earth, was laid aside. When this belief existed, there were no religious teachers whatever. But in course of time, temples were raised in honor of the different gods, and priests appointed to offer sacrifices to them and conduct their worship. These priests were looked upon as authorities in all religious matters, and the doctrine they taught was that man had been created by the gods, and that there had been several successive ages of men, which were called the Golden, Silver, Brazen, and Iron Ages. Life in the Golden Age was one unceasing round of ever-recurring pleasures, unmarred by sorrow or care. The favored mortals living at this happy time led pure and joyous lives, thinking no evil and doing no wrong. The earth brought forth fruits and flowers without toil or labor in plentiful luxuriance, and war was unknown. This delightful and godlike existence lasted for hundreds of years, and when at length life on earth was ended, death laid his hand so gently upon them that they passed painlessly away in a happy dream, and continued their existence as ministering spirits in Hades, watching over and 23, protecting those they had loved and left behind on earth. The men of the Silver Age were a long time growing up, and during their childhood, which lasted 100 years, they suffered from ill health and extreme debility. When they at last became men, they lived but a short time, for they would not abstain from mutual injury, nor pay the service due to the gods, and were therefore banished to Hades. There, unlike the beings of the Golden Age, they exercised no beneficent supervision over the dear ones left behind, but wandered about as restless spirits, always sighing for the lost pleasures they had enjoyed in life. The men of the Brazen Age were quite a different race of beings. Being as strong and powerful as those of the Silver Age were weak and enervated. Everything which surrounded them was of brass. Their arms, their tools, their dwellings, and all that they made. Their characters seemed to have resembled the metal in which they delighted. Their minds and hearts were hard, obdurate, and cruel. They led a life of strife and contention, introduced into the world, which had hitherto known nothing but peace and tranquility, the scourge of war, and were in fact only happy when fighting and quarreling with each other. Hitherto, Themis, the goddess of justice, had been living among mankind, but becoming disheartened at their evil doings, she abandoned the earth and winged her flight back to heaven. At last the gods became so tired of their evil deeds and continual dissensions that they removed them from the face of the earth and sent them down to Hades to share the fate of their predecessors. We now come to the men of the Iron Age. The earth, no longer teeming with fruitfulness, only yielded her increase after much toil and labor. The goddess of justice having abandoned mankind, no influence remained sufficiently powerful to preserve them from every kind of wickedness and sin. This condition grew worse as time went on, until at last Zeus in his anger let loose the watercourses from above and drowned every 24 individual of this evil race, except Deucalion and Pyrrha. The theory of Hesiod, the oldest of all the Greek poets, was that the Titan Prometheus, the son of Iapetus, had formed man out of clay, and that Athene had breathed a soul into him. Full of love for the beings he had called into existence, Prometheus determined to elevate their minds and improve their condition in every way. He therefore taught them astronomy, mathematics, the alphabet, how to cure diseases, and the art of divination. He created this race in such great numbers that the gods began to see the necessity of instituting certain fixed laws with regard to the sacrifices due to them and the worship to which they considered themselves entitled from mankind in return for the protection which they accorded them. An assembly was therefore convened at Mycenae in order to settle these points. It was decided that Prometheus, as the advocate of man, should slay an ox, which should be divided into 2 equal parts, and that the gods should select one portion, which should henceforth, in all future sacrifices, be set apart for them. Prometheus so divided the ox that one part consisted of the bones, which formed, of course, the least valuable portion of the animal, artfully concealed by the white fat, whilst the other contained all the edible parts, which he covered with the skin, and on the top of all he laid the stomach. Zeus, pretending to be deceived, chose the heap of bones, but he saw through the stratagem, and was so angry at the deception practiced on him by Prometheus that he avenged himself by refusing to mortals the gift of fire. 25. Prometheus, however, resolved to brave the anger of the great ruler of Olympus and to obtain from heaven the vital spark so necessary for the further progress and comfort of the human race. He accordingly contrived to steal some sparks from the chariot of the sun, which he conveyed to earth hidden in a hollow tube. Furious at being again outwitted, Zeus determined to be revenged first on mankind and then on Prometheus. To punish the former, he commanded Hephaestus, Vulcan, to mold a beautiful woman out of clay, and determined that through her instrumentality, trouble and misery should be brought into the world. The gods were so charmed with the graceful and artistic creation of Hephaestus that they all determined to endow her with some special gift. Hermes, Mercury, bestowed on her a smooth, persuasive tongue. Aphrodite gave her beauty and the art of pleasing. The Graces made her fascinating, and Athene, Minerva, gifted her with the possession of feminine accomplishments. She was called Pandora, which means all gifted, having received every attribute necessary to make her charming and irresistible. Thus, beautifully formed and endowed, this exquisite creature, attired by the Graces and crowned with flowers by the seasons, was conducted to the house of Epimetheus by Hermes, the messenger of the gods. Now Epimetheus had been warned by his brother not to accept any gift whatever from the gods, but he was so fascinated by the beautiful being who suddenly appeared before him that he welcomed her to his home and made her his wife. It was not long, however, before he had cause to regret his weakness. He had in his possession a jar of rare workmanship, containing all the blessings reserved by the gods for mankind, which he had been expressly forbidden to open. But woman's proverbial curiosity could not withstand so great a temptation, and Pandora determined to solve the mystery at any cost. Watching her opportunity, she raised the lid, and immediately all the blessings which 26 Alans the gods had thus reserved for mankind took wing and flew away. But all was not lost. Just as hope, which lay at the bottom, was about to escape, Pandora hastily closed the lid of the jar, and thus preserved to man that never-failing solace which helps him to bear with courage the many ills which assail him. Having punished mankind, Zeus determined to execute vengeance on Prometheus. He accordingly chained him to a rock in Mount Caucasus, and sent an eagle every day to gnaw away his liver, which grew again every night, ready for fresh torments. For 30 years, Prometheus endured this fearful punishment, but at length Zeus relented and permitted his son Hercules, to kill the eagle, and the sufferer was released. Third Dynasty, Olympian divinities. Zeus, Jupiter. Zeus, the great presiding deity of the universe, the ruler of heaven and earth, was regarded by the Greeks, first, as the god of all aerial phenomena, secondly, as the personification of the laws of nature, thirdly, as lord of state life, and fourthly, as the father of gods and men. As the god of aerial phenomena, he could, by shaking his aegis, produce storms, tempests, and intense darkness. At his command the mighty thunder rolls, the lightning flashes, and the clouds open and pour forth their refreshing streams to fructify the earth. As the personification of the operations of nature, he represents those grand laws of unchanging and harmonious order, by which not only the physical, but also 27ers, the moral world is governed. Hence, he is the god of regulated time, as marked by the changing seasons, and by the regular succession of day and night, in contradistinction to his father Cronus, who represents time absolutely, i.e., eternity. As the lord of state life, he is the founder of kingly power, the upholder of all institutions connected with the state, and the special friend and patron of princes, whom he guards and assists with his advice and counsel. He protects the assembly of the people and, in fact, watches over the welfare of the whole community. As the father of the gods, Zeus sees that each deity performs his or her individual duty, punishes their misdeeds, settles their disputes, and acts towards them on all occasions as their all-knowing counselor and mighty friend. As the father of men, he takes a paternal interest in the actions and well-being of mortals. He watches over them with tender solicitude, rewarding truth, charity, and uprightness, but severely punishing perjury, cruelty, and want of hospitality. Even the poorest and most forlorn wanderer finds in him a powerful advocate, for he, by a wise and merciful dispensation, ordains that the mighty ones of the earth should succor their distressed and needy brethren. The Greeks believed that the home of this their mighty and all-powerful deity was on the top of Mount Olympus, that high and lofty mountain between Thessaly and Macedon, whose summit, wrapped in clouds and mist, was hidden from mortal view. It was supposed that this mysterious region, which even a bird could not reach, extended beyond the clouds right into ether, the realm of the immortal gods. The poets describe this ethereal atmosphere as bright, glistening, and refreshing, exercising a peculiar, gladdening influence over the minds and hearts of those privileged beings permitted to share its delights. Here youth never ages, and the passing years leave no traces on its favored inhabitants. On the cloud-capped summit of Olympus was the palace of 28, Zeus and Hera, of burnished gold, chased silver, and gleaming ivory. One lower down were the homes of the other gods, which, though less commanding in position and size, were yet similar to that of Zeus in design and workmanship, all being the work of the divine artist Hephaestus. Below these were other palaces of silver, ebony, ivory, or burnished brass, where the heroes, or demigods, resided. As the worship of Zeus formed so important a feature in the religion of the Greeks, his statues were necessarily both numerous and magnificent. He is usually represented as a man of noble and imposing mien, his countenance expressing all the lofty majesty of the omnipotent ruler of the universe, combined with the gracious, yet serious, benignity of the father and friend of mankind. He may be recognized by his rich flowing beard and the thick masses of hair, which rise straight from the high and intellectual forehead and fall to his shoulders in clustering locks. The nose is large and finely formed, and the slightly opened lips impart an air of sympathetic kindliness, which invites confidence. He is always accompanied by an eagle, which either surmounts his scepter or sits at his feet. He generally bears in his uplifted hand a sheaf of thunderbolts, just ready to be hurled, whilst in the other he holds the lightning. The head is frequently encircled with a wreath of oak leaves. Illustration. The most celebrated statue of the Olympian Zeus was that by the famous Athenian sculptor Phidias, which was 40 feet high and stood in the temple of Zeus at Olympia. It was formed of ivory and gold and was 29 such a masterpiece of art that it was reckoned among the 7 wonders of the world. It represented the god seated on a throne, holding in his right hand a life-sized image of Nike, the goddess of victory, and in his left a royal scepter surmounted by an eagle. It is said that the great sculptor had concentrated all the marvelous powers of his genius on this sublime conception and earnestly entreated Zeus to give him a decided proof that his labors were approved. An answer to his prayer came through the open roof of the temple in the shape of a flash of lightning, which Phidias interpreted as a sign that the god of heaven was pleased with his work. Zeus was first worshipped at Dodona in Epirus, where, at the foot of Mount Tomarus, on the woody shore of Lake Joanina, was his famous oracle, the most ancient in Greece. Here, the voice of the eternal and invisible God was supposed to be heard in the rustling leaves of a giant oak, announcing to mankind the will of heaven and the destiny of mortals. These revelations being interpreted to the people by the priests of Zeus, who were called Selli. Recent excavations which have been made at this spot have brought to light the ruins of the ancient temple of Zeus, and also, among other interesting relics, some plates of lead, on which are engraved inquiries which were evidently made by certain individuals who consulted the oracle. These little leaden plates speak to us, as it were, in a curiously homely manner of a bygone time in the buried past. Or one person inquires what god he should apply to for health and fortune, another asks for advice concerning his child, and a third, evidently a shepherd, promises a gift to the oracle should a speculation in sheep turn out successfully. Had these little memorials been of gold instead of lead, they would doubtless have shared the fate of the numerous treasures which adorned this and other temples, in the universal pillage which took place when Greece fell into the hands of barbarians. Though Dodona was the most ancient of his shrines, the great national seat of the worship of Zeus was at Olympia in Elis, where there was a magnificent temple, 30, dedicated to him, containing the famous colossal statue by Phidias above described. Crowds of devout worshippers flocked to this world-renowned fane from all parts of Greece, not only to pay homage to their supreme deity, but also to join in the celebrated games which were held there at intervals of 4 years. The Olympic Games were such a thoroughly national institution that even Greeks who had left their native country made a point of returning on these occasions, if possible, in order to contend with their fellow countrymen in the various athletic sports which took place at these festivals. It will be seen on reflection that in a country like Greece, which contains so many petty states, often at variance with each other, these national gatherings must have been most valuable as a means of uniting the Greeks in one great bond of brotherhood. On these festive occasions, the whole nation met together, forgetting for the moment all past differences, and uniting in the enjoyment of the same festivities. It will doubtless have been remarked that in the representations of Zeus, he is always accompanied by an eagle. This royal bird was sacred to him, probably from the fact of its being the only creature capable of gazing at the sun without being dazzled, which may have suggested the idea that it was able to contemplate the splendor of divine majesty unshrinkingly. The oak tree, and also the summits of mountains, were sacred to Zeus. His sacrifices consisted of white bulls, cows, and goats. Zeus had 7 immortal wives, whose names were Metis, Themis, Eurynome, Demeter, Mnemosyne, Leto, and Hera. Metis, his first wife, was one of the Oceanides, or sea nymphs. She was the personification of prudence and wisdom, a convincing proof of which she displayed in her successful administration of the potion, which caused Cronus to yield up his children. She was endowed with the gift of prophecy, and foretold to Zeus that one of their children would gain ascendancy over 31 him. In order, therefore, to avert the possibility of the prediction being fulfilled, he swallowed her before any children were born to them. Feeling afterwards violent pains in his head, he sent for Hephaestus and ordered him to open it with an axe. His command was obeyed, and out sprang, with a loud and martial shout, a beautiful being, clad in armor from head to foot. This was Athene, Minerva, goddess of armed resistance and wisdom. Themis was the goddess of justice, law, and order. Eurynome was one of the Oceanides, and the mother of the Charities or Graces. Demeter, the daughter of Cronus and Rhea, was the goddess of agriculture. Mnemosyne, the daughter of Uranus and Gaia, was the goddess of memory, and the mother of the 9 muses. Leto, Latona, was the daughter of Coeus and Phoebe. She was gifted with wonderful beauty and was tenderly loved by Zeus, but her lot was far from being a happy one, for Hera, being extremely jealous of her, persecuted her with inveterate cruelty and sent the dreadful serpent Python to terrify and torment her wherever she went. But Zeus, who had observed with the deepest compassion her weary wanderings and agonized fears, resolved to create for her some place of refuge, however humble, where she might feel herself safe from the venomous attacks of the serpent. He therefore brought her to Delos, a floating island in the Aegean Sea, which he made stationary by attaching it with chains of adamant to the bottom of the sea. Here she gave birth to her twin children, Apollo and Artemis, Diana, 2 of the most beautiful of the immortals. According to some versions of the story of Leto, Zeus transformed her into a quail, in order that she might thus elude the vigilance of Hera, and she is said to have 32 resumed her true form when she arrived at the island of Delos. Hera, being the principal wife of Zeus and Queen of Heaven, a detailed account will be given of her in a special chapter. In the union of Zeus with most of his immortal wives, we shall find that an allegorical meaning is conveyed. His marriage with Metis, who is said to have surpassed both gods and men in knowledge, represents supreme power allied to wisdom and prudence. His union with Themis typifies the bond which exists between divine majesty and justice, law and order. Eurynome, as the mother of the charities or graces, supplied the refining and harmonizing influences of grace and beauty, whilst the marriage of Zeus with Mnemosyne typifies the union of genius with memory. In addition to the 7 immortal wives of Zeus, he was also allied to a number of mortal maidens whom he visited under various disguises, as it was supposed that if he revealed himself in his true form as King of Heaven, the splendor of his glory would cause instant destruction to mortals. The mortal consorts of Zeus have been such a favorite theme with poets, painters, and sculptors that it is necessary to give some account of their individual history. Those best known are Antiope, Leda, Europa, Callisto, Alcmene, Semele, Io, and Danae. Antiope, to whom Zeus appeared under the form of a satyr, was the daughter of Nyctius, king of Thebes. To escape the anger of her father, she fled to Sicyon, where King Epopeus, enraptured with her wonderful beauty, made her his wife without asking her father's consent. This so enraged Nyctius that he declared war against Epopeus, in order to compel him to restore Antiope. At his death, which took place before he could succeed in his purpose, Nyctius left his kingdom to his brother Lycus, commanding him, at the same time, to carry on the war and execute his vengeance. Lycus invaded Sicyon, defeated and killed Epopeus, and brought back Pan's 33 Antiope as a prisoner. On the way to Thebes, she gave birth to her twin sons, Amphion and Zethus, who, by the orders of Lycus, were at once exposed on Mount Cithaeron, and would have perished but for the kindness of a shepherd, who took pity on them and preserved their lives. Antiope was, for many years, held captive by her uncle Lycus, and compelled to suffer the utmost cruelty at the hands of his wife Dirce. But one day, her bonds were miraculously loosened, and she flew for shelter and protection to the humble dwelling of her sons on Mount Cithaeron. During the long period of their mother's captivity, the babes had grown into sturdy youths, and, as they listened angrily to the story of her wrongs, they became all impatience to avenge them. Setting off at once to Thebes, They succeeded in possessing themselves of the town, and after slaying the cruel Lycus, they bound Dirce by the hair to the horns of a wild bull, which dragged her hither and thither until she expired. Her mangled body was cast into the fount near Thebes, which still bears her name. Amphion became king of Thebes in his uncle's stead. He was a friend of the Muses and devoted to music and poetry. His brother, Zeus, was famous for his skill in archery and was passionately fond of the chase. It is said that when Amphion wished to enclose the town of Thebes with walls and towers, he had but to play a sweet melody on the lyre, given to him by Hermes, and the huge stones began to move and obediently fitted themselves together. The punishment of Dirce at the hands of Amphion and Zeus forms the subject of the world-renowned marble group in the museum at Naples, known by the name of the Farnese Bull. In sculpture, Amphion is always represented with a lyre, Zeus with a club. Leda, whose affections Zeus won under the form of a swan, was the daughter of Theseus, king of Aetolia. Her twin sons, Castor and Polydeuces or Pollux, were 34, renowned for their tender attachment to each other. They were also famous for their physical accomplishments, Castor being the most expert charioteer of his day, and Pollux the first of pugilists. Their names appear both among the hunters of the Caledonian boar hunt and the heroes of the Argonautic expedition. The brothers became attached to the daughters of Leucippus, prince of the Messenians, who had been betrothed by their father to Idas and Lynceus, sons of Apharius. Having persuaded Leucippus to break his promise, the twins carried off the maidens as their brides. Idas and Lynceus, naturally furious at this proceeding, challenged the Dioscuri to mortal combat, in which Castor perished by the hand of Idas and Lynceus by that of Pollux. Zeus wished to confer the gift of immortality upon Pollux, but he refused to accept it unless allowed to share it with Castor. Zeus gave the desired permission, and the faithful brothers were both allowed to live, but only on alternate days. The Dioscuri received divine honors throughout Greece and were worshipped with special reverence at Sparta. Europa was the beautiful daughter of Agenor, king of Phoenicia. She was one day gathering flowers with her companions in a meadow near the seashore, when Zeus, charmed with her great beauty and wishing to win her love, transformed himself into a beautiful white bull and trotted quietly up to the princess, so as not to alarm her. Surprised at the gentleness of the animal and admiring its beauty, as it lay placidly on the grass, she caressed it, crowned it with flowers, and, at last, playfully seated herself on its back. Hardly had she done so than the disguised god bounded away with his lovely burden and swam across the sea with her to the island of Crete. Europa was the mother of Minos, Aeacus, and Rhadamanthus. Minos, who became king of Crete, was celebrated for his justice and moderation, and after death he was created one of the judges of the lower world, which office he held in conjunction with his brothers. 35. Callisto, the daughter of Lycaon, king of Arcadia, was a huntress in the train of Artemis, devoted to the pleasures of the chase, who had made a vow never to marry. But Zeus, under the form of the huntress goddess, succeeded in obtaining her affections. Hera, being extremely jealous of her, changed her into a bear and caused Artemis, who failed to recognize her attendant under this form, to hunt her in the chase and put an end to her existence. After her death, she was placed by Zeus among the stars as a constellation under the name of Arctos, or the bear. Alcmena, the daughter of Electrion, king of Mycenae, was betrothed to her cousin Amphitryon, but, During his absence on a perilous undertaking, Zeus assumed his form and obtained her affections. Heracles, whose world-renowned exploits will be related among the legends, was the son of Alcmene and Zeus. Semele, a beautiful princess, the daughter of Cadmus, king of Phoenicia, was greatly beloved by Zeus. Like the unfortunate Callisto, she was hated by Hera with jealous malignity, and the haughty Queen of Heaven determined to effect her destruction. Disguising herself, therefore, as Beroe, Semele's faithful old nurse, she artfully persuaded her to insist upon Zeus visiting her, as he appeared to Hera in all his power and glory, well knowing that this would cause her instant death. Semele, suspecting no treachery, followed the advice of her supposed nurse, and the next time Zeus came to her, she earnestly entreated him to grant the favor she was about to ask. Zeus swore by the Styx, which was to the gods an irrevocable oath, to accede to her request whatsoever it might be. Semele, therefore, secure of gaining her petition, begged of Zeus to appear to her in all the glory of his divine power and majesty. As he had sworn to grant whatever she asked of him, he was compelled to comply with her wish. He therefore revealed himself as the mighty Lord of the universe, accompanied by thunder and lightning, and she was instantly consumed in the flames. Being 36. Io, daughter of Inachus, king of Argos, was a priestess of Hera. She was very beautiful, and Zeus, who was much attached to her, transformed her into a white cow in order to defeat the jealous intrigues of Hera, who, however, was not to be deceived. Aware of the stratagem, she contrived to obtain the animal from Zeus and placed her under the watchful care of a man called Argus Panoptes, who fastened her to an olive tree in the grove of Hera. He had 100 eyes, of which, when asleep, he never closed more than 2 at a time. Being thus always on the watch, Hera found him extremely useful in keeping guard over Io. Hermes, however, by the command of Zeus, succeeded in putting all his eyes to sleep with the sound of his magic lyre, and then, taking advantage of his helpless condition, slew him. The story goes that in commemoration of the services which Argus had rendered her, Hera placed his eyes on the tail of a peacock as a lasting memorial of her gratitude. Ever fertile in resource, Hera now sent a gadfly to worry and torment the unfortunate Io incessantly, and she wandered all over the world in hopes of escaping from her tormentor. At length, she reached Egypt, where she found rest and freedom from the persecutions of her enemy. On the banks of the Nile, she resumed her original form and gave birth to a son called Epiphus, who afterwards became king of Egypt and built the famous city of Memphis. Danae. Zeus appeared to Danae under the form of a shower of gold. Further details concerning her will be found in the legend of Perseus. The Greeks supposed that the divine ruler of the universe occasionally assumed a human form and descended from his celestial abode in order to visit mankind and observe their proceedings, his aim being generally either to punish the guilty or to reward the deserving. On one occasion, Zeus, accompanied by Hermes, made a journey through Phrygia, seeking hospitality and shelter wherever they went. But nowhere did they receive a 37 kindly welcome till they came to the humble cottage of an old man and his wife called Philemon and Baucis, who entertained them with the greatest kindness, setting before them what frugal fare their humble means permitted, and bidding them welcome with unaffected cordiality. Observing in the course of their simple repast that the wine bowl was miraculously replenished, the aged couple became convinced of the divine nature of their guests. The gods now informed them that on account of its wickedness, their native place was doomed to destruction, and told them to climb the neighboring hill with them. which overlooked the village where they dwelt. What was their dismay on beholding at their feet, in place of the spot where they had passed so many happy years together, nothing but a watery plain, the only house to be seen being their own little cottage, which suddenly changed itself into a temple before their eyes. Zeus now asked the worthy pair to name any wish they particularly desired, and it should be granted. They accordingly begged that they might serve the gods in the temple below and end life together. Their wish was granted, for, after spending the remainder of their lives in the worship of the gods, they both died at the same instant and were transformed by Zeus into trees, remaining forever side by side. Upon another occasion, Zeus, wishing to ascertain for himself the truth of the reports concerning the atrocious wickedness of mankind, made a journey through Arcadia. Being recognized by the Arcadians as King of Heaven, he was received by them with becoming respect and veneration. But Lycaon, their king, who had rendered himself infamous by the gross impiety of himself and his sons, doubted the divinity of Zeus, ridiculed his people for being so easily duped, and, according to his custom of killing all strangers who ventured to trust his hospitality, resolved to murder him. Before executing this wicked design, however, he decided to put Zeus to the test, and having killed a boy for the purpose, placed before him a dish containing human flesh. But Zeus was 38, not to be deceived. He beheld the revolting dish with horror and loathing, and angrily upsetting the table upon which it was placed, turned Lycaon into a wolf, and destroyed all his 50 sons by lightning, except Nyctimus, who was saved by the intervention of Gaia. Jupiter. The Roman Jupiter, who is so frequently confounded with the Greek Zeus, is identical with him only as being the head of the Olympic gods and the presiding deity over life, light, and aerial phenomena. Jupiter is Lord of life in its widest and most comprehensive signification, having absolute power over life and death, in which respect he differed from the Greek Zeus, who was to a certain extent controlled by the all-potent sway of the Moirae or Fates. Zeus, as we have seen, often condescends to visit mankind, either as a mortal or under various disguises, whereas Jupiter always remains essentially the supreme god of heaven and never appears upon earth. The most celebrated temple of Jupiter was that on the Capitoline Hill in the city of Rome, where he was worshipped under the names of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Capitolinus, and Tarpeius. The Romans represented him seated on a throne of ivory, holding in his right hand a sheaf of thunderbolts, and in his left a scepter, whilst an eagle stands beside his throne. Hera, Juno. Hera, the eldest daughter of Cronus and Rhea, was born at Samos, or, according to some accounts, at Argos, and was reared by the sea divinities Oceanus and Tethys, who were models of conjugal fidelity. She was the 39th principal wife of Zeus, and, as Queen of Heaven, participated in the honors paid to him, but her dominion only extended over the air, the lower aerial regions. Hera appears to be the sublime embodiment of strict matronly virtue, and is on that account the protectress of purity and married women. Faultless herself in her fidelity as a wife, she is essentially the type of the sanctity of the marriage tie, and holds in abhorrence any violation of its obligations. So strongly was she imbued with this hatred of any immorality, that, finding herself so often called upon to punish the failings of both gods and men in this respect, she became jealous, harsh, and vindictive. Her exalted position as the wife of the supreme deity, combined with her extreme beauty, caused her to become exceedingly vain, and she consequently resented with great severity any infringement on her rights as Queen of Heaven, or any apparent slight on her personal appearance. The following story will signally illustrate how ready she was to resent any slight offered to her. At the marriage of the sea nymph Thetis with a mortal called Peleus, all the gods and goddesses were present, except Eris, the goddess of discord. Indignant at not being invited, she determined to cause dissension in the assembly, and for this purpose threw into the midst of the guests a golden apple with the inscription on it, "For the fairest." Now, as all the goddesses were extremely beautiful, each claimed the apple, but at length, the rest having relinquished their pretensions, the number of candidates was reduced to 3: Hera, Athene, and Aphrodite, who agreed to appeal to Paris for a settlement of this delicate question, he being noted for the wisdom he had displayed in his judgment upon several occasions. Paris was the son of Priam, king of Troy, who, ignorant of his noble birth, was at this time feeding his flocks on Mount Ida, in Phrygia. Hermes, as messenger of the gods, conducted the 3 rival beauties to the young shepherd, and with breathless anxiety they awaited his decision. Each fair candidate endeavored 40 to secure his favor by the most tempting offers. Hera promised him extensive dominions, Athene, martial fame and glory, and Aphrodite, the loveliest woman in the world. But whether he really considered Aphrodite the fairest of the 3, or preferred a beautiful wife to fame and power, we cannot tell. All we know is that to her he awarded the golden apple, and she became ever after universally acknowledged as the goddess of beauty. Hera, having fully expected that Paris would give her the preference, was so indignant that she never forgave him, and not only persecuted him, but all the family of Priam, whose dreadful sufferings and misfortunes during the Trojan War were attributed to her influence. In fact, she carried her animosity to such an extent that it was often the cause of domestic disagreements between herself and Zeus, who espoused the cause of the Trojans. Among the many stories of these frequent quarrels, there is one connected with Heracles, the favorite son of Zeus, which is as follows. Hera, having raised a storm at sea in order to drive him out of his course, Zeus became so angry that he hung her in the clouds by a golden chain and attached heavy anvils to her feet. Her son Hephaestus tried to release his mother from her humiliating position, for which Zeus threw him out of heaven, and his leg was broken by the fall. Hera, being deeply offended with Zeus, determined to separate herself from him forever, and she accordingly left him and took up her abode in Euboea. Surprised and grieved at this unlooked-for desertion, Zeus resolved to leave no means untried to win her back again. In this emergency, he consulted Cithaeron, king of Plateau, who was famed for his great wisdom and subtlety. Cithaeron advised him to dress up an image in bridal attire and place it in a chariot, announcing that this was Plateau, his future wife. The artifice succeeded. Hera, incensed at the idea of a rival, flew to meet the procession in great anger, and seizing the supposed bride, she furiously attacked her and dragged off her nuptial attire. Her delight on discovering the deception was so great that a 41 reconciliation took place, and, committing the image to the flames, with joyful laughter, she seated herself in its place and returned to Olympus. Hera was the mother of Ares, Mars, Hephaestus, Hebe, and Eileithyia. Ares was the god of war, Hephaestus of fire, Hebe of youth, and Eileithyia presided over the birth of mortals. Hera dearly loved Greece, and indeed always watched over and protected Greek interests, her beloved and favorite cities being Argos, Samos, Sparta, and Mycenae. Illustration. Her principal temples were at Argos and Samos. From a remote period, she was greatly venerated at Olympia, and her temple there, which stood in the Altes or Sacred Grove, was 500 years older than that of Zeus on the same spot. Some interesting excavations which are now going on there have brought to light the remains of the ancient edifice, which contains, among other treasures of antiquity, several beautiful statues, the work of the famous sculptors of ancient Greece. At first, this temple was built of wood, then of stone, and the one lately discovered was formed of conglomerate of shells. In the Altes, races were run by young maidens in honor of Hera, and the fleetest of foot received in token of her victory an olive wreath and a piece of the flesh of the sacrifices. These races, like the Olympic Games, were celebrated at intervals of 4 years and were called Herae. A beautiful robe, woven by 16 women chosen from the 16 cities of Elis, was always offered to Hera on these 42 occasions, and choral songs and sacred dances formed part of the ceremonies. Hera is usually represented seated on a throne, holding a pomegranate in one hand and a scepter surmounted by a cuckoo in the other. She appears as a calm, dignified matron of majestic beauty, robed in a tunic and mantle. Her forehead is broad and intellectual, her eyes large and fully opened, and her arms dazzlingly white and finely molded. The finest statue of this divinity was that by Polycletus at Argos. Her attributes are the diadem, veil, scepter, and peacock. The first day of every month, a ewe lamb and sow were sacrificed to Hera. The hawk, goose, and more particularly the peacock were sacred to her. Flocks of these beautiful birds generally surround her throne and draw her chariot, Iris, the rainbow, being seated behind her. Her favorite flowers were the dittany, poppy, and lily. Juno. Juno, the Roman divinity supposed to be identical with the Greek Hera, differed from her in the most salient points. For whereas Hera invariably appears as the haughty, unbending queen of heaven, Juno, on the other hand, is revered and beloved as the type of a matron and housewife. She was worshipped in Rome under various titles, most of which point to her vocation as the protectress of married women. Juno was believed to watch over and guard the life of every woman from her birth to her death. The principal temples dedicated to her were in Rome, one being erected on the Aventine and the other on the Capitoline Hill. She had also a temple on the Arcs, in which she was worshipped as Juno Moneta, or the 43 warning goddess. Adjacent to this shrine was the public mint. On the 1st of March, a grand annual festival, called the Matronalia, was celebrated in her honor by all the married women of Rome, and this religious institution was accompanied with much solemnity. Pallas Athene, Minerva. Pallas Athene, goddess of wisdom and armed resistance, was a purely Greek divinity. That is to say, no other nation possessed a corresponding conception. She was supposed, as already related, to have issued from the head of Zeus himself, clad in armor from head to foot. The miraculous advent of this maiden goddess is beautifully described by Homer in one of his hymns. Snow-capped Olympus shook to its foundation. The glad earth re-echoed her martial shout. The billowy sea became agitated, and Helios, the sun god, arrested his fiery steeds in their headlong course to welcome this wonderful emanation from the godhead. Athena was at once admitted into the assembly of the gods, and henceforth took her place as the most faithful and sagacious of all her father's counselors. This brave, dauntless maiden, so exactly the essence of all that is noble in the character of the father of gods and men, remained throughout chaste in word and deed, and kind at heart, without exhibiting any of those failings which somewhat mar the nobler features in the character of Zeus. This direct emanation from his own self, justly his favorite child, his better and purer counterpart, received from him several important prerogatives. She was permitted to hurl the thunderbolts, to prolong the life of man, and to bestow the gift of prophecy. In fact, Athena was the only divinity whose authority was equal to that of Zeus himself, and when he had ceased to visit the earth in person, 44, she was empowered by him to act as his deputy. It was her especial duty to protect the state and all peaceful associations of mankind, which she possessed the power of defending when occasion required. She encouraged the maintenance of law and order, and defended the right on all occasions, for which reason, in the Trojan War, she espouses the cause of the Greeks and exerts all her influence on their behalf. The Areopagus, a court of justice where religious causes and murders were tried, was believed to have been instituted by her, and when both sides happened to have an equal number of votes, she gave the casting vote in favor of the accused. She was the patroness of learning, science, and art, more particularly where these contributed directly towards the welfare of nations. She presided over all inventions connected with agriculture, invented the plough, and taught mankind how to use oxen for farming purposes. She also instructed mankind in the use of numbers, trumpets, chariots, etc., and presided over the building of the Argo, thereby encouraging the useful art of navigation. She also taught the Greeks how to build the wooden horse by means of which the destruction of Troy was effected. The safety of cities depended on her care, for which reason her temples were generally built on the citadels, and she was supposed to watch over the defense of the walls, fortifications, harbors, etc. A divinity who so faithfully guarded the best interests of the state by not only protecting it from the attacks of enemies, but also by developing its chief resources of wealth and prosperity, was worthily chosen as the presiding deity of the state, and in this character, as an essentially political goddess, she was called Athene Polias. The fact of Athene having been born clad in armor, which merely signified that her virtue and purity were unassailable, has given rise to the erroneous supposition that she was the presiding goddess of war. But a deeper 45 study of her character in all its bearings proves that, in contradistinction to her brother Ares, the god of war, who loved strife for its own sake, she only takes up arms to protect the innocent and deserving against tyrannical oppression. It is true that in the Iliad we frequently see her on the battlefield fighting valiantly and protecting her favorite heroes, but this is always at the command of Zeus, who even supplies her with arms for the purpose, as it is supposed that she possessed none of her own. A marked feature in the representations of this deity is the aegis, that wonderful shield given to her by her father as a further means of defense, which, when in danger, she swung so swiftly round and round that it kept at a distance all antagonistic influences. Hence her name Pallas, from Palo, I swing. In the center of this shield, which was covered with dragon's scales, bordered with serpents, and which she sometimes wore as a breastplate, was the awe-inspiring head of the Medusa, which had the effect of turning to stone all beholders. In addition to the many functions which she exercised in connection with the state, Athene presided over the two chief departments of feminine industry, spinning and weaving. In the latter art, she herself displayed unrivaled ability and exquisite taste. She wove her own robe and that of Hera, which last she is said to have embroidered very richly. She also gave Jason a cloak wrought by herself when he set forth in quest of the Golden Fleece, being on one occasion challenged to a contest in this accomplishment by a mortal maiden named Arachne, whom she had instructed in the art of weaving. She accepted the challenge and was completely vanquished by her pupil. Though angry at her defeat, she struck the unfortunate maiden on the forehead with the shuttle which she held in her hand, and Arachne, being of a sensitive nature, was so hurt by this indignity that she hung herself in despair and was changed by Athene into a spider. This goddess is said to have invented the flute upon 46ms, which she played with considerable talent, until one day, being laughed at by the assembled gods and goddesses for the contortions which her countenance assumed during these musical efforts, she hastily ran to a fountain in order to convince herself whether she deserved their ridicule. Finding to her intense disgust that such was indeed the fact, she threw the flute away and never raised it to her lips again. Illustration. Athene is usually represented fully draped. She has a serious and thoughtful aspect, as though replete with earnestness and wisdom. The beautiful oval contour of her countenance is adorned by the luxuriance of her wealth of hair, which is drawn back from the temples and hangs down in careless grace. She looks the embodiment of strength, grandeur, and majesty, whilst her broad shoulders and small hips give her a slightly masculine appearance. When represented as the war goddess, she appears clad in armor, with a helmet on her head, from which waves a large plume. She carries the aegis on her arm, and in her hand a golden staff, which possessed the property of endowing her chosen favorites with youth and dignity. Athene was universally worshipped throughout Greece, but was regarded with special veneration by the Athenians, she being the guardian deity of Athens. Her most celebrated temple was the Parthenon, which stood on the 47th Acropolis at Athens, and contained her world-renowned statue by Phidias, which ranks second only to that of Zeus by the same great artist. This colossal statue was 39 feet high and was composed of ivory and gold. Its majestic beauty formed the chief attraction of the temple. It represented her standing erect, bearing her spear and shield. In her hand she held an image of Nike, and at her feet there lay a serpent. The tree sacred to her was the olive, which she herself produced in a contest with Poseidon. The olive tree thus called into existence was preserved in the temple of Erechtheus, on the Acropolis, and is said to have possessed such marvelous vitality that when the Persians burned it after sacking the town, it immediately burst forth into new shoots. The principal festival held in honor of this divinity was the Panathenaea. The owl, cock, and serpent were the animals sacred to her, and her sacrifices were rams, bulls, and cows. Illustration. Minerva. The Minerva of the Romans was identified with the Pallas Athene of the Greeks. Like her, she presides over learning and all useful arts, and is the patroness of the feminine accomplishments of sewing, spinning, weaving, etc. Schools were under her especial care, and schoolboys, therefore, had holidays during her festivals, the Greater Quinquatria, when they always brought a gift to their master, called the Minerval. It is worthy of notice that the only 3 divinities, 48, worshipped in the capital were Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, and in their joint honor the Ludi Maximi, or Great Games, were held. Themis. Themis, who has already been alluded to as the wife of Zeus, was the daughter of Cronus and Rhea, and personified those divine laws of justice and order by means of which the well-being and morality of communities are regulated. She presided over the assemblies of the people and the laws of hospitality. To her was entrusted the office of convoking the assembly of the gods, and she was also mistress of ritual and ceremony. On account of her great wisdom, Zeus himself frequently sought her counsel and acted upon her advice. Themis was a prophetic divinity and had an oracle near the river Cephissus in Boeotia. She is usually represented as being in the full maturity of womanhood, of fair aspect, and wearing a flowing garment, which drapes her noble, majestic form. In her right hand she holds the sword of justice, and in her left the scales, which indicate the impartiality with which every cause is carefully weighed by her eyes being bandaged so that the personality of the individual should carry no weight with respect to the verdict. This divinity is sometimes identified with Tyche, sometimes with Ananke. Themis, like so many other Greek divinities, takes the place of a more ancient deity of the same name who was a daughter of Uranus and Gaia. This elder Themis inherited from her mother the gift of prophecy, and when she became merged into her younger representative, she transmitted to her this prophetic power. Hestia, Vesta. Hestia was the daughter of Cronus and Rhea. She was the goddess of fire in its first application to the wants of mankind. Hence, she was essentially the presiding deity, 49, of the domestic hearth and the guardian spirit of man, and it was her pure and benign influence which was supposed to protect the sanctity of domestic life. Now, in these early ages, the hearth was regarded as the most important and most sacred portion of the dwelling, probably because the protection of the fire was an important consideration, for if once permitted to become extinct, reignition was attended with extreme difficulty. In fact, the hearth was held so sacred that it constituted the sanctum of the family, for which reason it was always erected in the center of every house. It was a few feet in height and was built of stone. The fire was placed on the top of it and served the double purpose of preparing the daily meals and consuming the family sacrifices. Round this domestic hearth or altar were gathered the various members of the family, the head of the house occupying the place of honor nearest the hearth. Here prayers were said and sacrifices offered, and here also every kind and loving feeling was fostered, which even extended to the hunted and guilty stranger, who, if he once succeeded in touching this sacred altar, was safe from pursuit and punishment, and was henceforth placed under the protection of the family. Any crime committed within the sacred precincts of the domestic hearth was invariably visited by death. Illustration. In Grecian cities there was a common hall, called the Prytaneum, in which the members of the government had their meals at the expense of the state, and here too was the Hestia, or public hearth, with its fire, by means of which those meals were prepared. It was customary for emigrants to take with them a portion of this sacred fire, which they jealously guarded and brought with them to their new home, where it served as a connecting link between the young Greek colony and the mother country. Hestia is generally represented standing, and in accordance with the dignity and sanctity of her character, always appears fully draped. Her countenance is distinguished by a serene gravity of expression. 50. Vesta. Vesta occupies a distinguished place among the earlier divinities of the Romans. Her temple in Rome, containing as it were the hearthstone of the nation, stood close beside the palace of Numa Pompilius. On her altar burned the never-ceasing fire, which was tended by her priestesses, the Vestal Virgins. The Temple of Vesta was circular in form and contained that sacred and highly prized treasure, the Palladium of Troy. The great festival in honor of Vesta, called the Vestalia, was celebrated on the 9th of June. Demeter, Ceres. Demeter, from Gemeter, Earth Mother, was the daughter of Cronus and Rhea. She represented that portion of Gaia, the whole solid Earth, which we call the Earth's crust, and which produces all vegetation. As goddess of agriculture, field fruits, plenty, and productiveness, she was the sustainer of material life, and was therefore a divinity of great importance. When ancient Gaia lost, with Uranus, her position as a ruling divinity, she abdicated her sway in favor of her daughter Rhea, who henceforth inherited the powers which her mother had previously possessed, receiving in her place the honor and worship of mankind. In a very old poem, Gaia is accordingly described as retiring to a cavern in the bowels 51 of the earth, where she sits in the lap of her daughter, slumbering, moaning, and nodding for ever and ever. It is necessary to keep clearly in view the distinctive difference between the three great earth goddesses Gaia, Rhea, and Demeter. Gaia represents the earth as a whole, with its mighty subterranean forces. Rhea is that productive power which causes vegetation to spring forth, thus sustaining men and animals. Demeter, by presiding over agriculture, directs and utilizes Rhea's productive powers. But in later times, when Rhea, like other ancient divinities, loses her importance as a ruling deity, Demeter assumes all her functions and attributes, and then becomes the goddess of the life-producing and life-maintaining earth crust. We must bear in mind the fact that man in his primitive state knew neither how to sow nor how to till the ground. When, therefore, he had exhausted the pastures which surrounded him, he was compelled to seek others which were as yet unreaped. Thus, roaming constantly from one place to another, settled habitations, and consequently civilizing influences, were impossible. Demeter, however, by introducing a knowledge of agriculture, put an end, at once and forever, to that nomadic life which was now no longer necessary. Illustration. The favor of Demeter was believed to bring mankind rich harvests and fruitful crops, whereas her displeasure caused blight, drought, and famine. The island of Sicily was supposed to be under her especial protection, and there she was regarded with particular veneration, the Sicilians naturally attributing the wonderful fertility of their country to the partiality of the goddess. Demeter is usually represented as a woman of noble 52's bearing and majestic appearance, tall, matronly, and dignified, with beautiful golden hair, which falls in rippling curls over her stately shoulders, the yellow locks being emblematical of the ripened ears of corn. Sometimes she appears seated in a chariot drawn by winged dragons. At others she stands erect, her figure drawn up to its full height, and always fully draped. She bears a sheaf of wheat ears in one hand and a lighted torch in the other. The wheat ears are not unfrequently replaced by a bunch of poppies, with which her brows are also garlanded, though sometimes she merely wears a simple riband in her hair. Demeter, as the wife of Zeus, became the mother of Persephone, Proserpine, to whom she was so tenderly attached that her whole life was bound up in her, and she knew no happiness except in her society. One day, however, whilst Persephone was gathering flowers in a meadow, attended by the ocean nymphs, she saw to her surprise a beautiful narcissus, from the stem of which sprang forth 100 blossoms. Drawing near to examine this lovely flower, whose exquisite scent perfumed the air, she stooped down to gather it, suspecting no evil, when a yawning abyss opened at her feet, and Hades, the grim ruler of the lower world, appeared from its depths, seated in his dazzling chariot drawn by 4 black horses. Regardless of her tears and the shrieks of her female attendants, Hades seized the terrified maiden and bore her away to the gloomy realms over which he reigned in melancholy grandeur. Helios, the all-seeing sun god, and Hecate, a mysterious and very ancient divinity, alone heard her cries for aid, but were powerless to help her. When Demeter became conscious of her loss, her grief was intense, and she refused to be comforted. She knew not where to seek for her child, but feeling that repose and inaction were impossible, she set out on her weary search, taking with her 2 torches which she lighted in the flames of Mount Etna to guide her on her way. For 9 long days and nights she wandered on, inquiring of everyone she met for tidings of her child. 53. But all was in vain. Neither gods nor men could give her the comfort which her soul so hungered for. At last, on the 10th day, the disconsolate mother met Hecate, who informed her that she had heard her daughter's cries, but knew not who it was that had borne her away. By Hecate's advice, Demeter consulted Helios, whose all-seeing eye nothing escapes, and from him she learnt that it was Zeus himself who had permitted Hades to seize Persephone and transport her to the lower world in order that she might become his wife. Indignant with Zeus for having given his sanction to the abduction of his daughter, and filled with the bitterest sorrow, she abandoned her home in Olympus and refused all heavenly food. Disguising herself as an old woman, she descended upon earth and commenced a weary pilgrimage among mankind. One evening she arrived at a place called Eleusis in Attica and sat down to rest herself near a well beneath the shade of an olive tree. Oh, the youthful daughters of Celeus, the king of the country, came with their pails of brass to draw water from this well, and seeing that the tired wayfarer appeared faint and dispirited, they spoke kindly to her, asking who she was and whence she came. Demeter replied that she had made her escape from pirates who had captured her, and added that she would feel grateful for a home with any worthy family, whom she would be willing to serve in a menial capacity. The princesses, on hearing this, begged Demeter to have a moment's patience while they returned home and consulted their mother, Metaneira. They soon brought the joyful intelligence that she was desirous of securing her services as nurse to her infant son Demophoon, or Triptolemus. When Demeter arrived at the house, a radiant light suddenly illumined her, which circumstance so overawed Metaneira that she treated the unknown stranger with the greatest respect and hospitably offered her food and drink. But Demeter, still grief-worn and dejected, refused her friendly offers and held herself apart from the social board. At length, however, the maid-servant Iambe succeeded, by means 54 of playful jests and merriment, in somewhat dispelling the grief of the sorrowing mother, causing her at times to smile in spite of herself, and even inducing her to partake of a mixture of barley meal, mint, and water, which was prepared according to the directions of the goddess herself. Time passed on, and the young child throve amazingly under the care of his kind and judicious nurse, who, however, gave him no food, but anointed him daily with ambrosia, and every night laid him secretly in the fire in order to render him immortal and exempt from old age. But, unfortunately, this benevolent design on the part of Demeter was frustrated by Metaneira herself, whose curiosity, one night, impelled her to watch the proceedings of the mysterious being who nursed her child. When, to her horror, she beheld her son placed in the flames, she shrieked aloud. Demeter, incensed at this untimely interruption, instantly withdrew the child and, throwing him on the ground, revealed herself in her true character. The bent and aged form had vanished, and in its place there stood a bright and beauteous being, whose golden locks streamed over her shoulders in richest luxuriance, her whole aspect bespeaking dignity and majesty. She told the awestruck Metanera that she was the goddess Demeter and had intended to make her son immortal, but that her fatal curiosity had rendered this impossible, adding, however, that the child, having slept in her arms and been nursed on her lap, should ever command the respect and esteem of mankind. She then desired that a temple and altar should be erected to her on a neighboring hill by the people of Eleusis, promising that she herself would direct them how to perform the sacred rites and ceremonies, which should be observed in her honor. With these words, she took her departure, never to return. Obedient to her commands, Celeus called together a meeting of his people and built the temple on the spot which the goddess had indicated. It was soon completed, and Demeter took up her abode in it, but her heart was still sad for the loss of her daughter, and the whole world felt the influence of her grief and dejection. This was, 55 indeed, a terrible year for mankind. Demeter no longer smiled on the earth she was wont to bless, and though the husbandman sowed the grain, and the groaning oxen ploughed the fields, no harvest rewarded their labor. All was barren, dreary desolation. The world was threatened with famine, and the gods with the loss of their accustomed honors and sacrifices. It became evident, therefore, to Zeus himself that some measures must be adopted to appease the anger of the goddess. He accordingly dispatched Iris and many of the other gods and goddesses to implore Demeter to return to Olympus, but all their prayers were fruitless. The incensed goddess swore that until her daughter was restored to her, she would not allow the grain to spring forth from the earth. At length, Zeus sent Hermes, his faithful messenger, to the lower world with a petition to Hades, urgently entreating him to restore Persephone to the arms of her disconsolate mother. When he arrived in the gloomy realms of Hades, Hermes found him seated on a throne with the beautiful Persephone beside him, sorrowfully bewailing her unhappy fate. On learning his errand, Hades consented to resign Persephone, who joyfully prepared to follow the messenger of the gods to the abode of life and light. Before taking leave of her husband, he presented to her a few seeds of pomegranate, which in her excitement she thoughtlessly swallowed, and this simple act, as the sequel will show, materially affected her whole future life. The meeting between mother and child was one of unmixed rapture, and for the moment all the past was forgotten. The loving mother's happiness would now have been complete had not Hades asserted his rights. These were that if any immortal had tasted food in his realms, they were bound to remain there forever. Of course, the ruler of the lower world had to prove this assertion. This, however, he found no difficulty in doing, as Ascalaphus, the son of Acheron and Orphne, was his witness to the fact. Zeus, pitying the disappointment of Demeter at finding 56 her hopes thus blighted, succeeded in effecting a compromise by inducing his brother Hades to allow Persephone to spend 6 months of the year with the gods above, whilst during the other 6 she was to be the joyless companion of her grim lord below. Accompanied by her daughter, the beautiful Persephone, Demeter now resumed her long-abandoned dwelling in Olympus. The sympathetic earth responded gaily to her bright smiles. The corn at once sprang forth from the ground in fullest plenty. The trees, which late were seared and bare, now donned their brightest emerald robes, and the flowers, so long imprisoned in the hard, dry soil, filled the whole air with their fragrant perfume. Thus ends this charming story, which was a favorite theme with all the classic authors. It is very possible that the poets who first created this graceful myth merely intended it as an allegory to illustrate the change of seasons. In the course of time, however, a literal meaning became attached to this and similar poetical fancies, and thus the people of Greece came to regard as an article of religious belief what, in the first instance, was nothing more than a poetic simile. In the temple erected to Demeter at Eleusis, the famous Eleusinian mysteries were instituted by the goddess herself. It is exceedingly difficult, as in the case of all secret societies, to discover anything with certainty concerning these sacred rites. The most plausible supposition is that the doctrines taught by the priests to the favored few whom they initiated were religious truths which were deemed unfit for the uninstructed mind of the multitude. For instance, it is supposed that the myth of Demeter and Persephone was explained by the teachers of the mysteries to signify the temporary loss which Mother Earth sustains every year when the icy breath of winter robs her of her flowers and fruits and grain. It is believed that in later times a still deeper meaning was conveyed by this beautiful myth, viz., the doctrine of the immortality of the soul, the grain which, as it were, remains dead for a time in the dark earth, only 57, to rise one day dressed in a newer and lovelier garb, was supposed to symbolize the soul which, after death, frees itself from corruption to live again under a better and purer form. When Demeter instituted the Eleusinian mysteries, Celeus and his family were the first to be initiated, Celeus himself being appointed high priest. His son Triptolemus and his daughters, who acted as priestesses, assisted him in the duties of his sacred office. The mysteries were celebrated by the Athenians every 5 years and were, for a long time, their exclusive privilege. They took place by torchlight and were conducted with the greatest solemnity. In order to spread abroad the blessings which agriculture confers, Demeter presented Triptolemus with her chariot drawn by winged dragons and, giving him some grains of corn, desired him to journey through the world, teaching mankind the arts of agriculture and husbandry. Illustration: Demeter exercised great severity towards those who incurred her displeasure. We find examples of this in the stories of Stellio and Erysichthon. Stellio was a youth who ridiculed the goddess for the eagerness with which she was eating a bowl of porridge, when weary and faint in the vain search for her daughter. Resolved that he should never again have an opportunity of thus offending, she angrily threw into his face the remainder of the food and changed him into a spotted lizard. Erysichthon, son of Triopas, had drawn upon himself the anger of Demeter by cutting down her sacred groves, for which she punished him with a constant and insatiable hunger. He sold all his possessions in order to satisfy his cravings, and was forced at last to devour his own limbs. His daughter Metra, who was devotedly attached to him, possessed the power of transforming herself into a variety of different animals. More, by this means, she contrived to support her father, who sold her again and again each time she assumed a different form, and thus he dragged on a pitiful existence. 58. And so we come to the end of tonight's reading. Sleep well, dream of old worlds. Until tomorrow night.